What's going on? Welcome in for a very exciting episode here with SODFS. We are talking everything Week 10 NFL main slate on Draftkings. Grab a seat, grab a cold drink, hang out with us tonight as we break down this main slate. That's right, I'm not by myself tonight. I have a special guest in the house, a guy who's been on the show a few weeks back. You might remember our guy, Jake Tribbey. And you can find him on Twitter at Jake Tribbey. He is staff writer for Fantasy Points. He does weekly articles such as the DFS Early Look, DFS Values. My newest and absolute probably favorite article that I read each and every week is the chart porn. I am addicted to the chart porn, DFS Study Hall, and much more. Welcome in, Jake, man. I appreciate you joining me this evening.
Yeah, I really appreciate you guys having me. I'm really excited to talk over this slate. I said on Cashing Points earlier that I wish this was a Tom Brady slate so that I could give like a 20 or 30 minute unhinged rant about how the collapse of FTX and the loss of his entire fortune, impacts his projection this week. But that might have to wait until week 11. But yeah, I really appreciate you guys having me on.
That has been an interesting story, and I appreciated your insights there in the Discord chat, and it's been fun to watch that one unfold. How'd you do last week, man? Last week was a pretty good DFS week. I feel like a lot of the plays that we were banking on and you were talking about last week ended up coming through for us.
Yeah, there were a lot of fun plays last week. I think one of the more surprising things that ended up happening was Justin Fields being 12, 13% owned depending on the contest you played. I was expecting him to clock in more around 4 or 5% ownership. So I played 10% Fields and had some lineups that did pretty well. Unfortunately, nothing really challenged for a tournament bank because I took most of Saturday to hang out with my girlfriend, and I didn't really grind down my player pool to avoid Hunter Renfrow on my best team. So that was a bit of a shame, and it was certainly surprising to see so many people play Justin Fields, but maybe it shouldn't have been just given how well he projected. But yeah, it was a really fun week.
Yeah, I was super surprised when Fields ownership came in as high as it was. But I will say last week when I was looking at the projected ownership on last week's show, I was surprised at how low he was projecting as far as ownership goes. And I was saying I'm at this price point, I'm willing to go cash builds. I'm willing to go GPP builds. And it ended up turning out pretty damn good for us. We actually brought up the Justin Fields, Tyreek Hill, Cole Kmet stack last week, and that we took that shit all the way to the bank. So, hey, we might be dipping back into the Justin Fields bag this week, as well as those steaming hot Miami Dolphins that we just can't get away from.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when guys are running hot, sometimes you have to chase it, and I think in those instances, especially given their matchups this week, it makes sense. But I know we'll get into that a little later.
Yeah, or on the opposite spectrum of that, when guys are, running cold, Tom Brady and the Bucks, sometimes it's just best to stay away. Yeah, we want to be the first one there, but I'm tired of trying to be the first one there because it keeps coming back to bite me in the ass. So until I see Tom Brady, get out of his personal life woes, his football woes, I think I'm going to stay away from the Bucks for the time being.
Yeah, not to mention the financial woes too, right? I think Scott said it on Cashing Points where he was like, Brady made a pact with the devil, but turns out the devil, is getting his fair share in 2022. Brady's having a pretty rough time here, so yeah.
Well, let's talk about some of these games that we are looking at on this slate. We've got 10 games available here, and right off the rip, I mean, the biggest thing that you notice is the most attractive games are all coming in the early portion of the slate. So that makes it a little bit more interesting, kind of creates a little bit more of a challenge when we're talking about late swaps and checking ownership after those 1 o'clock locks. So, just right off the rip, I noticed that when looking at this slate, a couple of the games that are a little more intriguing. The highest over under is the Jaguars and Chiefs there. So I think that's going to be one of the more popular games on the slate. Browns and Dolphins is another one that I think is going to be popular. Vikings and Bills, I believe, would have popped, but the whole Josh Allen injury situation is one that I think is going to keep some people away. Even if Josh Allen ends up coming out and playing, just with the injury concern and his price point, I don't think you're going to see a ton of people wanting to roll Josh Allen out this week.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, if Allen plays, it's definitely going to be a guy that I'm pretty heavily interested in. But it's looking like he's probably not going to play, and that really changes that Buffalo Minnesota game from the perspective of the total, the perspective of game stacking. I am just looking at the slate on the whole. I'm really glad that there's 3 afternoon games instead of 2, because I just don't particularly find 2-game slates very enjoyable. But I do like 3, 4, 5-game slates. So yeah, I'll be playing some afternoon only this week, unlike last week where it was just a terrible split.
Yeah, and I think those afternoon slates are going to be super interesting. Really, there's not a whole lot of mainstays that we're really looking at of those 3. Maybe a little bit of running back action there for the Raiders. Cardinals and Rams might be a game that I'm just going to flat out avoid at this point. Especially if Kyler doesn't play. We don't know if Stafford's going to play, but there's a slew of injuries, and a lot of that is going to have implications on the slate. So it's something that you're going to have to monitor shortly. I'm going to go over a few of them now. Las Vegas Raiders have officially put tight end Darren Waller and Hunter Renfrow on injured reserve. So that kind of, once again, and I mean, the Raiders offense has been terrible as of late. Yeah, we had the Devontae Adams blow-up game 2 weeks ago or whatever it was. But outside of that and the Josh Jacobs 3-game run stretch that they had, they've been a pretty frustrating team to try to nail down on a slate basis. So I think, though, getting those 2 guys, we won't get sucked into that Hunter Renfrow trap that you were talking about anymore. Now it'll be guys like Mac Hollins that are potentially getting that next man look. But couple more here. Josh Allen did return to the field Friday on a limited capacity and is officially listed as questionable for the matchup against Minnesota. So again, something to keep your eye on there. DeAndre Swift officially off the injury report, but apparently he's frustrated with his usage, and the coaches are just telling him to throw that frustration and put it out on the field. So, this could be either one of 2 things. Swift could be kind of combative with the head coach and coaches there and potentially get a little bit less looks, or this could be a squeaky wheel type of week here for DeAndre Swift. I think if his ownership comes in low, which I think it will be semi-low this week, I'm going to be sneaking in some shares. Mecole Hardman did not practice at all this week due to the abdomen injury, and he's probably, I believe he is going to be held out of the Week 10 matchup against the Jags. I think that makes us like Juju Smith-Schuster a little bit more based off of his recent production. And now Mecole Hardman, who kind of seemed to be the one other guy there in the wide receiver room. MVS has been an afterthought. Yes, Kadarius Toney is there, but it hasn't really acclimated to the offense at this point. So I think it's a little bit better for our Pat Mahomes builds. Gives us a little bit more of a concentrated passing attack that we can try to stack around. Colts Jonathan Taylor was a full participant in Friday's practice and is officially off the injury report. Deion Jackson will be out, so potentially Zach Moss and or Jordan Wilkins will be in the mix this week. Cowboys running back Zeke Elliott may be questionable for the Cowboys game, but he is expected to play according to Jerry himself. Cardinals Kyler Murray, who is a game-time decision, was limited the last 2 days with that hamstring injury that he suffered last week. So again, I mentioned lots of injuries that need to be monitored throughout the course of the weekend, leading up into kickoff times at 1 o'clock. Jake, anything else you want to mention about the slate as a whole before we move into some positional pricing?
Yeah, I think in regards to Swift, some people I definitely get your point. He's a guy who really pops on film. He just always looks great. My concern is just that you look through his game logs. I mean, there's really never been that have to have it game from Swift from a DFS tournament perspective, and I think a big part of that is just because his TD equity is really poor. We see Jamal Williams get all those red zone carries, and I think Swift being fully healthy could take away from Jamal Williams' ownership a bit. And if Jamal Williams clocks in at 8 or 10% and has a 3-touchdown game, I mean, that's going to be pretty great for tournaments. So I think I'm going to look more in that direction. But, and then in regards to the Raiders, I think with Renfrow being out alongside Waller, I think that is a slight boost for Foster Moreau. I know that this week in DFS values, we we sort of, we talked about Greg Dulcich being, the optimal tight end overall, but I think Moreau's still a very strong play and someone I'm pretty interested in. But I know we'll get to tight end later.
Yeah, Moreau will definitely get you 5 points, so
Exactly.
you can bank on that.
Yeah.
I do want to add that Sons of Dynasty and SODFS are officially part of the Fantasy Points Media Group. Make sure you guys check out all of the great content that the Fantasy Points Premium Access has to offer. Use promo code SUNS22 for 10% off your subscription today. Jake, you'll get tons of great content, like all of the content. And Jake, a lot of your content's free to read. I can't believe how many articles on a weekly basis that Fantasy Points is putting out for free. So, I mean, yeah, we talk subscriptions all the time, and a lot of people don't want to pony up for that. That's fine. Head on over to fantasypoints.com. Check out, there's tons of free content, tons of stuff that you can check out on a regular basis. And then maybe down the line, you want to get into it a little bit deeper. But I can't urge you enough to go check out fantasypoints.com.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have a ton of great content. The advanced matchup piece that Wes Huber writes every week is like well worth the annual subscription, and like that alongside expected fantasy points, the XFP report that Scott writes, I just think are, just two incredible articles, like probably some of the best in the industry. I think without a doubt. XFP is something that I've been reading for a really long time, and turned me into a Scott Barrett fan well before I worked for him. So yeah, the articles on fantasypoints.com really are second to none.
I kid you not, the advanced matchups article this week that Wes did, which is free, I might add, to go see, is the best article that I've and no disrespect to you, Jake, it's the best article that I've read all year long coming out of fantasypoints.com, and it's 100% free. I mean, just the Millie Maker digestion that he has there at the beginning is just so valuable, to be able to have it broke down like that, to where you can take a step back and look at what's happening and what you can do to try to correlate your lineups with getting to the big bang,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, advanced matchups is just incredible. It still like blows my mind. Like I'm writing a ton. I feel like there's just not enough time in the week. It absolutely blows my mind that Wes is able to write something like advanced matchups and be like the number one college football DFS analyst in the world. Like, I mean, the guy's just insane. Like, I don't understand how he gets any sleep or has time to spend with his family or anything like that. I mean, he's truly incredible. So yeah, no offense taken for you saying that was, the best article you've ever read, because I think it's the same for me, man. Like, it's really good.
Yeah. I was in the Discord chirping about how good it was earlier today, and now I'm still chirping here later on this evening. But let's move along, Jake. Let's get into some of the positional pricing. As per usual, we're going to start at top with the captains there, the quarterback position. And the guy that I was pounding the table for last week is going to be the first guy that I'm going to talk about this week. That is Justin Fields. Yes, he's been priced up, but I am going back to it. He's finished as a top 10 scoring QB now in 5 straight games, and has finished as a top 5 QB the last few weeks, mostly due to his weekly rushing. And in fact, over his last 4 weeks, Field has 49 rush attempts for 408 yards for a ridiculous 8.3 yards per carry. And you can also add in those 3 rushing touchdowns that he had during that same 3-week span. The Lions defense ranks 3rd worst in total fantasy points per game allowed, 5th worst in passing fantasy points, and 4th worst in rushing fantasy points per game allowed to opposing quarterbacks. So we've been chasing this Detroit defense all year long, and I mean, Justin Fields once again is just, I'm gonna have some exposure this week. I think he's gonna be mega popular this week, maybe even more popular than he was last week, which was a surprise to us. But I'm going back to him this week. 6,500. Yes, it's a nice price increase, but I think he can still easily bring back 3-4 times that value.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think obviously we want to target quarterbacks going against this Detroit defense. And, I think one of the unique things with Fields is that, like, he'll be popular on his own, but his pass catchers, Darnell Mooney, Chase Claypool, Cole Kmet, probably won't crack 10% ownership. I mean, maybe Mooney will head that direction. But I think he can get pretty unique just by pairing Fields with a pass catcher. His rushing numbers are absolutely insane. He's averaging 12.2 carries per game, 102 rushing yards per game, 8.5 carries per game. and 0.8 rushing touchdowns per game since week 6. If he sustained those numbers for a full season, they would rank best, third best, and sixth best all time among quarterbacks, which is just ridiculous. I mean, like, Justin Fields was my highest owned player at any position on Underdog Best Ball, which is where I got down probably 80% of my best ball action. And through the first month of the season, I was like, I'm such an idiot. Like, I'm the worst best ball player ever. But no, like, he's looking like he's an absolute smash pick. And, you know, the thesis was correct. He doesn't have to be a great passer. He's really passing the ball closer to an average, like a league average level. And, you know, it doesn't matter. He could be a below average passer. And yeah, if he's running for 100 yards a game, it doesn't matter. He's a great quarterback. So, at least for fantasy. So yeah, I'm really excited to play Fields this week.
And I think a great pivot off of Justin Fields is to go up $200 there to Tua there for the Miami Dolphins, coming in at $6,700. I know you're in on him this week.
Yeah, absolutely. So Tua's played 5 fully healthy games, and he's averaged 336 passing yards per game and 24 fantasy points per game, which would rank first and third among quarterbacks over the full season. He's averaging 0.58 fantasy points per dropback, which would rank second among QBs, and his plus 7.2 completion percentage over expectation ranks first. I mean, the dude's playing really well. I know that there are some film guys out there arguing like, oh, you know, he's not playing that well. This is really just a scheme thing. But, you know, for fantasy football, that doesn't matter. Like, the results are what matters. And yeah, he's playing out of his mind. He has a pretty decent matchup this week against Cleveland, but, you know, again, like his wide receivers are doing most of the work here, and yeah, he's doing a great job getting the ball to him. So yeah, I really like Tua this week. I think he's a great tournament play. He'll probably be around 10% owned, but yeah, you know, I think it's great.
Yeah, no, I like him. I like his wide receivers, both of them a pretty good amount this week as well. A couple of cheaper quarterback options this week. We've got Jacoby Brissett coming in at 5,400. They're in that same game there with but the Dolphins have been the single most favorable matchup for opposing QBs, allowing a league high 22.6 fantasy points per game, and they've been somewhat, halfway decent against the run game. The biggest thing is we know that this Dolphins team can put points on the board. It's a great matchup for Tua. It's a great matchup for his receiving options. I think that the Dolphins are going to come out and just essentially, dominate this game and put Jacoby Brissett in. I mean, the past, I think 3 or 4 weeks now, he's thrown for 35 plus attempts, and I think we can definitely lock him in for 35 plus this week in this matchup. So I like Jacoby Brissett this week. Another one is Trevor Lawrence there for the Jacksonville Jaguars. He's coming in at 5,400 as well. So both guys right there in that range. And Jake, tell me why you like Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, so Lawrence has been super streaky lately, but he draws a really great matchup against the Chiefs defense. That's allowed plus 5.0 schedule adjusted passing fantasy points per game, which I believe leads the league. They've also allowed the most passing TDs and the 6th most passing yards this season. The Jags are going to be playing from behind, and this Chiefs passing defense just isn't very good. I think Lawrence, his play being really up and down this year, is going to scare some people off of them and probably make them drift more towards Mahomes if they want to stack this game. But I think Lawrence has a lot of juice, especially at 5,400. I mean, the same price as Brissett, and last week he was PFF's second highest graded quarterback, and we know the ability is there. He's obviously a really great player when he's on. So yeah, I really like Lawrence this week if you're trying to get off of Mahomes and still want to stack that game.
Yeah, I think I am in on some Jacksonville stacks this week potentially, and that includes the running back position as far as the next guy I'm going to talk about, and that's Travis Etienne coming in at 7,100 this week. He just keeps popping these past couple weeks. He's really turned it on with the James Robinson being traded. He has the 4th best schedule adjusted matchup for running backs this week and the 3rd best matchup for receiving running backs. So obviously we think, as you mentioned, that Trevor Lawrence is going to have to throw the ball a ton. And while the game script and the receiving work hasn't necessarily been there for Etienne the last couple of games, even though he has been producing with a regular workload, I think this could be the week that you almost had to have him. I really like Etienne this week, and when I'm making builds, he's hard to get away from, even at that $7,100 price tag.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I mean, he's a top 3 play at the position this week, and I think like what's really encouraging is that he had a season high 61% route share last week, suggesting that, even if Jacksonville falls behind, probably a lot, given that they're 9.5 point dogs. ETN is going to get a good amount of receiving work here, and he's getting 20, 25 carries a game on top of it. So if the Jags can keep it close, it's going to be a great workload. And even if they fall behind, he might head towards 8 targets. So yeah, there's a lot of reasons to love ETN. And plus, you watch the games, he looks really, really good.
Now, when you click on the running back tab there to insert in your RB1, there's a glaring name sitting up at the top there, all the way up at the top at 8,600, and that's our guy Saquon Barkley. Obviously, he feels like a smash play this week. Do you think the $8,600 price tag, though, is enough to keep some people off of him?
Ownership will be interesting with Barkley. Looking at projections, which I've been trusting a little bit less this year than maybe in years past, but looking at ownership projections, I think he may clock in at a similar ownership to Derrick Henry, Alvin Kamara, and will probably be lower than Dameon Pierce. And so if he's 20, even 25%, I'm more than willing to indulge, just because the Houston Texans are the nuts matchup for opposing running backs. I think it was Jeff Henderson who tweeted out that if Derrick Henry played the Texans every week, he'd run for 3,700 yards over the course of the season. Houston's dead last in schedule adjusted fantasy points per game allowed. They've allowed the most yards after contact. They've allowed the third most yards per carry and a 7.2% explosive play rate, which is third most. They're just an objectively terrible run defense. Everyone knows that you attack this team on the ground, and Saquon Barkley is ridiculously talented. He's a guy who's capable of ripping off huge plays, and I'd expect a lot of that this week, given the matchup. And we know he's going to see elite usage. He's going to get all the goal line work, decent amount of receiving work. It's an extremely difficult play to poke holes in, which is something that I'm always trying to do, given that I only play tournaments. So if you see a chalky guy, you want to think through all the ways he can fail. And at least for Saquon, it's really hard to see that, especially with the Giants. I believe they're 5-point favorites, 5.5-point favorites. And Barkley's only been a favorite about a dozen times in his career, but he's always smashed as a favorite, averaging, I believe, 26 fantasy points per game. And he's exceeded 32 Draftkings points in 36% of those games where he's been a favorite. So yeah, just really everything lining up for Barkley this week.
And obviously staying in that same game, you mentioned him already, Dameon Pierce there for the Houston Texans, 6,300. I know you like him this week as well. You were talking him up on cashing points earlier with Scott Barrett.
Yeah. So, since week 3, Pierce ranks 3rd in carries per game, 19th in targets per game, 8th in expected fantasy points per game, 4th in rushing yards per game, and 11th in fantasy points per game. So, it's pretty obvious that he's a strong play this week, given that he's the RB13 by DraftKings salary. He's a glaring value. He's a cash game lock. For tournaments, though, Scott Barrett pointed out that the Giants have really shut down the running backs on, run-centric teams. They held Derrick Henry, Khalil Herbert without David Montgomery, Aaron Jones, and Kenneth Walker below 12.5 fantasy points. So, with that in mind, I think you could make a decent case that Pierce at probably 30% ownership is, just a bit too heavy. And, maybe you can fade him in tournaments. People are probably going to be scared to do that, given how much the running back chalk has just absolutely crushed this season. But yeah, I think I'll probably end up underweight Pierce in tournaments, despite the fact that he's the best value of the week at the position.
And more of a middle price guy there, another guy who's been one of the chalk running backs over the last few weeks, Josh Jacobs, coming in at 7,600 this week. I think he's got one of the better matchups that he's had. Now, the matchup itself isn't necessarily a great matchup on paper, but given the environment and the game script that we're expecting in this game, we think that Josh Jacobs is going to be a little bit closer to that 80+% snap share this week.
Yeah, exactly. So this is a great fantasy points data stat that I pulled. Jacobs has posted a very bell cow 83% snap share when the Raiders are leading. And he's posted a 78% snap share when the score is tied. But he's only played on 60% of the snaps when they're trailing. But thankfully, the Raiders being favored by, I believe it's 6 points this week, suggests that that's really unlikely to be a problem. Over his career, since 2019, Jacobs averages 21.3 fantasy points per game in wins of 3 points or more, compared to just 12.4 fantasy points per game outside of that split. So, when Jacobs is favored and we expect the Raiders to lead, he's really just a smash play. Like, I don't think you want to overthink it. And I think, he'll be popular probably around 15 to 20%, but I do think some people are going to be a little scared off of him just because he's, had poor performances lately because the Raiders have struggled to put points on the board. I mean, that game against New Orleans, they couldn't do anything. They put in Jared Stidham for, basically the entire fourth quarter. And I saw some people on Twitter kind of panicking like, oh my God, Josh Jacobs only played 55% of the snaps or whatever. But it's like, yeah, I mean, they got totally blown out and the backups came in and, for most of the fourth quarter. So I think people might be a little thrown off by Jacobs' recent stats, and that could move his ownership down a little bit. Granted, the field's sharp enough to recognize that he is still a bell cow when the Raiders are expected to win.
Yeah, I don't find myself wanting to go too cheap at running back this week. It's a stiff market down there at the running back position. I mean, really, you get below 5,500 and it gets ugly quick. But if you are going all the way down there to 5,500, I'll mention Jeff Wilson there for the Miami Dolphins. I do love the matchup here against the Cleveland Browns. They're the fourth worst in rushing fantasy points per game allowed, eighth worst in yards per carry allowed. And in his first action as a Dolphin, Jeff Wilson outproduced his teammate Mostert. Wilson had 27 snaps while Mostert had 24. Wilson had the better production on the backfield split, though. You can get a nice discount on Jeff Wilson this week. And I mean, if anything, I think it's going to continue to be a 50-50 split. If not, Jeff Wilson working his way into more of a lead back at this point. I mean, he came in week one and split touches with Mostert down the middle and was more productive than Mostert. Yes, it kind of feels like a coin flip, but the game script is there. We like Miami in this matchup, and obviously with Tua and we're interested in the passing stack. But I think if it becomes semi-popular, a great way to get away from Tyreek Hill or potentially get away from Jalen Waddle would be to indeed flip the script and roll out a Jeff Wilson this week.
Yeah. I think if you're getting creative at running back, Wilson is certainly interesting. I do wonder, how much upside does he have if this is, say, 55-45 committee or 60-40 committee? I think you could question the upside there, but also, he was on the team for 3 days and was immediately their lead running back. So that's a pretty strong case. One last guy who I wanted to mention real quick, who we talked up on cashing points, so I think is a really strong contrarian running back play, is Dalvin Cook, especially if Josh Allen doesn't play, because, then Minnesota has a pretty solid chance to win this game, and positive the game script is obviously good for Cook. People are off Cook because, he really hadn't had many great performances early on in the season. He was hurt. His usage was limited. He's exceeded 20 expected fantasy points per game in each of his last 2 games. He didn't do that in any of his first 6 games. He's really back to elite tier Dalvin Cook usage, and we know Dalvin Cook is a really good player. He's going to be about 5% owned. So if you're looking for, if you want to pay up at running back, but you don't want to eat the chalk with Saquon Barkley or Derrick Henry, I think Dalvin Cook is a really good spot to go.
Let me ask you, Jake, any interest in Najee Harris this week with his current price point?
So Najee Harris is the cheapest he's ever been, which is, certainly compelling. He projects decently well. Actually, in the consensus projections that I pull, he's the number 7 running back value. The problem with Najee is, one, he's not very good. The Steelers' offense isn't very good. And 2, Tomlin has sort of passively hinted at Jaylen Warren potentially getting more work. Now, I know a few Steelers beats said like, oh, that's ridiculous. Jaylen Warren isn't going to be a bell cow by any means. It'll probably continue to be 65-35 split in favor of Najee. So, if you're throwing out 150 lineups, I think you can justify, 5 or 10 of those lineups having some Najee Harris exposure, because no one's going to want to play him. But that's not a spot that I'm personally going to attack.
Okay, well, let's move along here. I do want to take a minute to mention Elite Picks. Elite Picks is the newest daily fantasy lineup optimizer. Take as much control as you'd like by locking in or customizing players and letting the DF lineup optimizer fill in the rest. Elite Picks optimizer uses top projections, and provides cutting-edge multi-lineup features to direct you to the lineup guidance that you need for building a winning DraftKings and or FanDuel lineup. Never tried an optimizer before? No problem. You can try this one absolutely free. Just click on the link below to sign up for a free 1-week trial here at Elite Picks. Let's talk about some wide receivers here, Jake, and I'm going to start here up at Amari Cooper there for the Cleveland Browns. He's coming in at 6,500 this week. I mentioned that I like Jacoby Brissett. I like this passing game for the Browns this week. Amari's not the only wide receiver I'm interested in. DPJ is also in my crosshairs, so I think either one's viable. There's actually a slew of ways that you can stack up these Cleveland Browns and their passing attack this week. A lot of value there on that side of the football, but I like Amari Cooper and this Miami Dolphins defense that ranks 4th best in schedule-adjusted fantasy points per game allowed to opposing outside wide receivers. So that is in Cooper and DPJ's wheelhouse. As far as the tight end position goes, Njoku, I believe, has been ruled out again, so we're getting Bryant for another week. Do I have the stones to go back to him after how he treated us this past week? I'm not sure, but he's cheap enough that I'll probably end up finding out.
Yeah, I think Amari Cooper is really interesting from an ownership perspective. Probably clock in between 5 and 8% ownership. DPJ is projecting pretty well, and I think he'll end up being pretty popular. If you're double stacking Tua, which has been, I think it's won 2 millionaire makers at this point, like, Tua plus Tyreek Hill plus Jalen Waddle, you're really scraping the bottom of the barrel in terms of salary options. So, if you're game stacking this with a double stack on the Miami side, you're almost certainly playing DPJ or Harrison Bryant, which is going to make, Amari Cooper plus Tua or even Amari Cooper plus Brissett probably pretty unique overall. So I definitely like the Cooper call. One thing that you will see with him, though, at least cited a decent amount, is that he's really struggled on the road. His home away splits are pretty extreme.
Terrible.
I guess he just really likes sleeping in his own bed. But yeah, I'm still willing to go there. I think I'll probably end up overweight in tournaments, and we know he has nuclear upside. I mean, he's a really talented player.
Yeah, guys in my circle have referred to Amari Cooper as the fantasy locust over the year. And he'll burn you just when you're not expecting it. A couple of other guys we like here on this slate. Let's go up at the top, and maybe the first time we've seen another wide receiver other than Cooper Kupp up at the top of the wide receiver position. That's Tyreek Hill, the Miami Dolphins, coming in at 9,100 this week, Jake.
Yeah, so no player this season has as many 12-target games as Tyreek Hill does. He has 6. And the elite volume has been crucial to his dominance. Tyreek Hill only has 19 career games with 12 or more targets. But in those games, he averages 28.5 fantasy points per game, a mark that's 10% better than the greatest fantasy receiving season of all time, which was Cooper Kupp last year. And, I think an important note with that is that Tyreek Hill has earned 12 or more targets in 4 of his 5 games with a fully healthy Tua, compared to 13 of 60 regular season games with Patrick Mahomes. So his volume in this Miami offense is truly elite, and he always smashes when given volume. What's really interesting is that so far, based on the projections that I've seen, it looks like he's projecting similarly on a lot of major sites to Cooper Kupp. And, obviously he's a similar price. I do think Hill will be more popular, but I mean, if these two are close in ownership really at all, I think that's a pretty big mistake. To me, Hill is clearly the best wide receiver play of the slate at any price. I'm going to have him on probably 40 or 50% of my tournament teams. And, if he scores 25 to 30 points, you're still okay. And that seems to be close to his median right now. And, we all know he's capable of scoring 50 or even 60 points. I mean, his upside is just absolutely insane. So, yeah, I think really you want as much Tyreek Hill as you can fit in this week.
Yeah, I mean, each and every week, I don't think that there's a wide receiver on the main slate that possesses more upside than Tyreek Hill. Going back, though, to our Jacksonville Jaguars stack, you've taken Trevor Lawrence. We'll bring on Christian Kirk. He's coming in at 5,900 this week. And after an up-and-down season, Kirk, he settled back into a nice little role here with the elevated play we've been seeing from Trevor Lawrence. Kirk has seen 7 or more targets in 3 straight games and has caught 18 of his 26 targets for 212 yards and a touchdown over weeks 7 through 9. We all know that the Jags are likely going to be trailing this game, being 9.5-point underdogs. So So the highest total on the slate in this game, Christian Kirk being the main go-to weapon in the passing game there for Trevor Lawrence. 5,900. That's competitive. I like that price point.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Kirk will end up being pretty popular, but I mean his matchup is really strong. The Chiefs have given up the second most fantasy points per game to opposing slot wide receivers. And yeah, Kirk he's been a little unpredictable, but in some ways he's been predictable in that he's done really well in plus matchups and he's done really poorly in bad matchups. And this is a really good matchup. And like we discussed, I mean, Jacksonville's probably going to have to throw a lot in this game as 9.5-point underdog. So yeah, I definitely like Kirk.
And sticking with the stacks here, we talked Chicago Bears, Justin Fields. Well, I got to bring up my guy Darnell Mooney at 5,500. The past few weeks with the rise of Justin Fields, we're finally getting some Mooney exposure that we can work with here. He has had 50-plus receiving yards in 5 of the past 6 games. He's enjoying 38% of the Bears' air yards while boasting a career-best 12.1 ADOT on the year. This matchup should help to pad those stats a little bit more. As we mentioned, the Lions DST is pretty much in the bottom 3 of every passing related statistic that you can think of. So I'm in on Chicago stacks this week. Darnell Mooney, maybe going back to my guy Cole Kmet with 3 touchdowns in the past 2 weeks. He came through for us last week. So maybe I'll have a little bit more Kmet exposure this week.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I said, I think these Chicago pass catchers will be fairly low owned, especially compared to Justin Fields. So yeah, I mean, making your Fields lineups unique might be as simple as just pairing him with Mooney, pairing him with Kmet. I think Claypool is also in play there, but yeah, I mean, you really want to target every pass catcher you can against this Detroit defense. It's been a really juicy defense to target all season, and yeah, I don't really see any reason to go against that this week.
And with these Chicago Bear stacks that we're talking about, I mean, the bring back is right here, so close that it's almost slapping me in the face. Let's talk about Amon-Ra St. Brown this week, coming in at 6,900, Jake. You're into him, I'm into him. Let's tell him why.
Yeah, so his recent usage has suggested he's fully healthy. He's back up to an elite tier targets per route run. He's running a route on basically every snap. And in his last 10 healthy games, he's hit at least 10 targets in 9 of them. Cooper Kupp has exceeded 10 targets in just 5 of his last 10 games. Amon-Ra, from a production perspective, over his last 10 games, has been about 92% as productive as Kupp, but he's 77% of Kupp's week 10 price. So really, Amon-Ra is just a really strong bet on volume, and I think it's a lock he's going to see volume this week, pretty much like every week. One, knock against him is that he has been playing a little bit more outside recently, and this Lions offense really prioritizes getting the ball to the slot. But at the same time, I mean, he's their most talented wide receiver by far, and 10 targets is pretty much his floor. So at 6,900, and from a target volume perspective, there may not be a better play on the slate, with the exception of Chris Olave, who I know we'll talk about in a second.
Yeah, I mean, let's not waste any time. Olave has been a popular guy these last few weeks. I mean, essentially stepping in and having to be the guy there in the wide receiver room for the Saints as their main other guys couldn't get healthy. Michael Thomas is a myth at this point, and Jarvis Landry can't seem to get back on the field. So it's been the Chris Olave show and a couple of other scrubs mixing in with him. But Chris Olave, still a competitive price point here at 6,800. It's starting to creep up there. He's starting to get a little bit of respect on that price tag, but we like him again this week.
Yeah, absolutely. I still don't think he's getting enough respect. So only Olave, Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs, Cooper Kupp, Deebo Samuel, and CeeDee Lamb they're the only wide receivers to exceed 12 expected fantasy points in each of their last 7 games. But the major difference between Olave and those other wide receivers in week 10 is that Olave is $1,500 cheaper than that cohort on average. In effect, Olave is the same bet on volume that Amon-Ra St. Brown is. But the difference between them is that St. Brown's probably going to be 15% owned, while Olave is going to be 5, maybe 8%. So Olave isn't projecting that well, which at least not as well as St. Brown, which I think is a mistake. I think they're very comparable plays, and because of the ownership difference, I'm going to end up with a lot of Olave. After Hill, he's probably my second favorite wide receiver play overall on the slate.
Well, people just keep seeing Andy Dalton turn into Jameis Winston every week, throwing these picks after picks, and they're a little bit scared off. But I think that target share and big play opportunity that he possesses, and as you mentioned, the leverage that we're getting by getting off of St. Brown there with Olave is nice in itself. Any other wide receivers you want to touch base on before we get into the schmuck position that we call tight ends?
Not no one really jumps out. I mean, I think we talked about a lot of the best plays. Deontay Johnson is a little interesting. Again, sort of a similar bet on volume. Oh, I think, if I'm getting off Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle is definitely the spot to go. Waddle's just really good. I mean, we know Tyreek Hill is sort of the alpha in that offense, but I mean, arguably Waddle has comparable upside. He's probably the closest thing to Tyreek Hill. So yeah, I really like Waddle at a price point that's about $1,500 cheaper than Hill. I mean, we already touched on Amari Cooper.
Donovan Peoples-Jones.
Yeah. If you're paying down at receiver, DPJ's a pretty clear top option. I think Mac Hollins is also interesting. Another thing that I wanted to mention was, so Zay Jones projects maybe a point better than Marvin Jones, but realistically, I mean, they're about the same play, and Zay Jones is going to be significantly more popular than Marvin Jones. So if you're stacking this Chiefs game, I actually kind of like forcing in some Marvin Jones just to get off the Zay Jones chalk, because, like I said, I kind of see these guys as basically the same play. They're priced similarly, they project very similarly, but Zay's going to be more popular. He's popping in almost every optimizer. So yeah, I like the idea of getting off Zay and onto Marvin, and something like a Trevor Lawrence stack or a Mahomes stack where you're looking for a run back or two.
Yeah, and I mean those little pivots could be instrumental too. I mean, you're talking about Zay Jones, you're talking about Marvin Jones. What's the difference when they're projecting the same? Well, that 9% ownership difference, it can be the difference. So just finding those little edges that you can find. Obviously, we know it's going to be a super popular game. Well, who are the guys that aren't going to be super popular of that game, and figuring out if they're viable in a certain build can really set you apart.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one of my favorite things about DFS. I tend to 150 max. So I have a lot of fun just sort of going through games and figuring out where I'm going to get different with stacks, because you can play the chalkiest quarterbacks. You just got to get a little unique with who you're pairing them with.
All right, let's move on into the tight end position here. It feels super ugly this week at the tight end position. I really can't find many guys that I want to use. So as per usual, I'm just going all the way down and finding some of my preferred cheap options. But I know you're interested in Tyler Higbee this week, 3,600. And there might not be a ton of people interested. Yeah, he was hot rolling off the beginning of the year. The last couple of weeks, I mean, Tyler Higbee has burned a lot of people. You might be hard-pressed even in this matchup. The matchup on paper is great. We've been targeting the Cardinals all year long at the tight end position, and even recently over the last couple of weeks, they're bottom of the league when it comes to defending the tight end position. So he's in a great bounce-back spot here, and you like him?
Yeah, so I do and I don't. So actually, I added him to the show sheet on Wednesday. I have come off him a bit. I do think there are some preferable options, which I know we'll discuss. I mean, Arizona, like you said, they're really just the best matchup for opposing tight ends. We always want to target tight ends against Arizona. Higbee prior to Week 9 was third in targets per game and fourth in expected fantasy points per game among tight ends. So in effect, like playing Higbee is sort of a bet on him just getting back to that elite volume. The problem is that he really hasn't seen that volume as of late. And part of that has been that his route share since Van Jefferson returned to the lineup has fallen to 38%. And they're just, the Rams offensive line is the worst in the NFL, which is pretty incredible given that they were arguably the best in the NFL last season. And they're just keeping Higbee into pass block more. So, I do think Higbee is viable, not quite as viable as, I thought he was when I added him to the show sheet on Wednesday. But, he still projects pretty well. And yeah, I think you can definitely get away with playing him. But honestly, the guy that I like more than Higbee is Pat Freiermuth. Mike Tomlin had a quote earlier this week where he was like, I really don't think we're going to be missing Chase Claypool over the middle much because we have Pat Freiermuth, and we view their roles as pretty redundant. So, you can make a decent argument that a good chunk of Claypool's volume is going to head Freiermuth's way. And since Kenny Pickett took over as the starter, Freiermuth has been the most targeted Pittsburgh pass catcher on a per route basis. I think there's a lot of juice there to Freiermuth, and he actually projects worse than Higbee. So yeah, I think I prefer Freiermuth to Higbee, but both are viable.
I like a couple of guys in the 3,400 range. I already mentioned Cole Kmet and the Lions that have supplied opposing tight ends with the 6th most receptions per game, the 5th most yards per game, and the 4th most touchdowns per game. So again, the Lions defense, we're going to continue to attack it any way we can, and Cole Kmet's cheap enough to bring along with my Justin Fields builds. Favorite tight end, though, play of the week would have to be Greg D, the big Dulich there for the Denver Broncos. He's 3,400. In his last 2 games, Dulich collected 20 and 21% target shares, and his route percentage jumped from 64 to 91%. This Titans defense is allowing the 8th most targets per game, the 4th most receptions per game, and the 3rd most yards per game to the tight end position. He's really been the lone bright spot of this Broncos offense these last couple of weeks. I think that trend continues here this week as they have a tough run matchup this week. So I think Russell Wilson is going to have to air it out a little bit, and Greg Dulich seems to be on the receiving end of many of his passes.
Yeah, I really like him as a play. I mean, we talked about he's the top tight end value of the week overall. And yeah, like you said, I mean, pretty much the only thing to get excited about in this Denver offense. So I definitely like him.
Anytime I can get a guy with the last name like that, because when he takes it in for 6, I'll stand up, I'll be like, Greg Dulles, and my wife's looking at me like, you fucking idiot. And I'm like, I have fun with it. But
the hair too, right? I mean, the hair is just incredible.
Oh man,
he's get that Head and Shoulder sponsorship if he keeps playing like that.
You got the Polamalu vibes, flowing out the helmet like that. Yeah, you get a little bit of XP from me. So let's talk about some true tight ends though, or true punts there at the tight end position. I know my guy. Coach here has been in on Gregson this week. He thinks that this is the week that he's viable. I'm not so sure. I really don't want to. I haven't been wanting to chase the Colts tight ends at all throughout the course of the season. And over the past couple of weeks, just seeing what the offensive flow is doing, I don't think I want any part of that offense. But another guy I'm going to bring up is Houston Texans Tegan Quintoriano. I'm sorry if I butchered that, but he's coming in at 2,500 this week. Made his season debut in Week 9. They announced, just prior to kickoff, that he was actually going to be the starter. I was able to plug him into a captain spot there on the showdown slate that night, and he came through and got that touchdown. And I think that maybe they're going to continue to look to him. Yeah, he's a little bit more of that traditional wide tight end. It's going to be asked to block a little bit more and help some of those offensive line deficiencies. But, they're starving for, pass catching weapons there for Mills. Maybe Cooks and Nico Collins are going to be back this week. Still questionable as of right now, but they were trending in the right direction. Any other true tight end punt plays that you like this week, Jake?
Yeah, there are a few guys I'm interested in. I mean, we already talked about Harrison Bryant a little bit. I think he's probably the best way to save salary if you're looking at tight ends under 3K. Austin Hooper is the minimum price, and I think if Ryan Tannehill plays, that's a pretty interesting matchup. Denver is the single toughest matchup for wide receivers. And, obviously this offense runs through Derrick Henry, but if Tannehill plays, they will have a little juice as a passing attack. And, Hooper's probably the best option there outside of the wide receivers who again are facing the single toughest matchup.
Lucky for the Titans, they don't have any wide receivers.
Exactly right. And then a final guy I wanted to mention is Brock Wright for Detroit. After the Hockenson trade, he led the team in route share. It's once you get down to him, I think it's pretty thin. I prefer Hooper and Bryant overall, but Wright's certainly viable if you're looking to save salary.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you. I like Bryant Call, and it's going to be between him, Komet, and Dulich for me mostly this week.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to go up any higher than that, and it gets ugly when you get down in that 2,500 range. So those are my three preferred tight end options. All three of them are pairable with some stacks. We talked about Dulich being a one-off there. I don't want much Denver Broncos or really a whole lot of exposure to that game in general, but I think at the tight end position, Dulich will be just fine.
Yeah, absolutely. That game's gonna be gross, man. Especially, I mean, if Tannehill doesn't play, like that total could come down to 37 or something. It could be bad.
So from a tournament perspective, what quarterback stack do you think that you're most interested in this week as of right now?
Probably after the chalky guys, like I'll play Mahomes, I'll play Fields, I'll play Tua. I'll try to get creative with how I do it. I think Trevor Lawrence really stands out to me though as sort of the next best option, and in GPPs will probably be 5-6%. His matchup's really strong, and Christian Kirk projects to be pretty popular. So does Zay Jones. I think Evan Ingram's dealing with a bit of a back injury and is questionable, but I think he's expected to play. But yeah, you can mix in some Marvin Jones there. You can throw in ETN. I think you can get pretty creative with Lawrence stacks, and then on the other side you can throw in obviously Kelsey or Juju, MBS. There's a lot of juice to that game potentially, and like I said, it's a good matchup. Jacksonville really is going to have to throw a lot, and Lawrence's up and down play I think is going to scare some people off of him, which to me makes him a pretty compelling play for GPPs. Beyond that, I think it's pretty tough. Jacoby Brissett probably stands out as the next best option. Daniel Jones, I think is also in play given the Saquon chalk. I think you can sort of get leverage off of Saquon by playing a Daniel Jones stack, maybe Wan'Dale Robinson.
Wan'Dale.
Yeah, I like Wan'Dale. I think Wan'Dale's a pretty decent play. Could throw in Slayton. I mean, maybe Marcus Johnson if you really want to scrape the bottom of the barrel. But with Jones, you're mostly banking on rushing ability there. He's sort of like poor man's Justin Fields in that sense.
Yeah, and don't watch the game. Anytime you play Daniel Jones, you never watch that game. You don't want to put yourself through that. So if you get him into a lineup, just set it and forget about it. Check it once the afternoon games roll along.
Yeah, absolutely. You do not want to be sweating Daniel Jones and watching those games.
So again, we mentioned that when building lineups for this slate, the most popular games and the games to target are happening there at the 1:00 game. So there's not going to be a ton of wiggle room after the 1:00 lock comes through. Maybe try to find a couple of pieces there in the afternoon. There's some DSTs that are viable. Definitely, a lot of times I like to keep my flex position and maybe just my DST open and let that be a little bit of a salary cushion there for the afternoon slates that roll in, and potentially just having the information after the 1:00 games lock in, and me having the ability to alter my puzzle in any way is advantageous heading into those afternoon games. So while it doesn't seem sexy in most lineups that you are going to build this week, you're going to see a slew of 1:00 start times going down there. Obviously, don't let that hamper your decisions one way or another. I'm just saying, don't forget about that late swap action because it's going to be easy to forget about this week.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think people sort of forget about how easy it is to gain leverage with late swap. I mean, especially if you have a lineup that's fallen behind. I mean, having that flexibility to be able to pivot to a lower owned guy in your flex or at running back, wide receiver is super valuable. But yeah, I mean, the problem is I think the four best games are all 1 p.m. So it is going to be hard to find some viable guys in the 4 p.m. slate. But yeah, I mean, that's certainly a good note. Never want to forget about late swap.
Yeah, I think trying to identify the best plays / chalkier plays from those afternoon games, potentially penciling them in and then building off your 1 o'clock games off of those guys, leaving yourself with potentially, if you know your earlier game guys hit and they weren't very chalky, you can let those afternoon guys ride. And if not, if it doesn't work out in the morning, no problem to switch off. There's not going to be a ton of popular guys in that afternoon slate, so it'll be easy to pivot off of the Josh Jacobs and game leverage off the field that way as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I do want to encourage everybody to sign up at fantasypoints.com today. With Fantasy Points, you have access to the newest and best website in the industry for your season-long daily fantasy and NFL betting needs. Access to articles, live streams, podcasts, cheat sheets, community chat, online tools, and more, all available at your fingertips. It's the only subscription that you will need this football season. Sign up for the Fantasy Points premium content using our promo code SUNS22, and you can get 10% off at fantasypoints.com. Go check it out, because if you ride with Fantasy Points, you will score more in 2022 and beyond. We are pretty much closing it down here at this point, Jake. Is there anything that you want to plug or any other final thoughts on this slate that you want to get out before we start to close it out?
Yeah, you can find all my work at fantasypoints.com. Like Dan mentioned, I think 3 out of my 4 weekly articles are completely free to read. And then you can find me on Twitter at Jake Tribbey. When it comes to final thoughts on the slate, I think we did a pretty good job covering everything. One thing that I will say though is I would avoid Derek Carr at pretty much all costs. The dude's 5% owned every week. I feel like I put this note in study hall every week. The guy's had one game of 25 or more fantasy points since 2019. That's the lowest rate of any quarterback by far. It's not even close. I'm only interested in Carr when he's close to 1%, and he seems to always project well enough to pull 4 or 5%, and he just always fails. So that's my tip of the week is don't play Derek Carr, and if he somehow ends up being the optimal quarterback, I'm sure I'll eat those words.
We will revisit this.
Yes,
definitely.
Please. Definitely post that clip on Twitter. I'm sure it'll do numbers. Fantasy Receipts can retweet it.
Hey, please make sure you are subscribed to the SOD YouTube page. Click the bell so that you never miss a show with us. Big thanks to Fantasy Points Media Group and our producer, Brother Matt, who is behind the scenes with us here tonight. You can find him on Twitter at DY_NastyDude. He does all of our layover and graphic work here that you see each and every episode. So big hat tip to him. Check out ViridianGlobal.com for all your Sons of Dynasty and SODFS gear that you could possibly imagine. They have tons and tons of fantasy football and other apparel there available. So if SOD or SODFS isn't in your bag, there's tons of other great ones there to choose from. So appreciate each and every one of you tuning in with us tonight. Let's go kick some ass on this slate. College football all day tomorrow and then heading into the Sunday slate. So hit us up on Twitter if you got any questions. Again, I'm going to post the link for the optimizer here in the description down below, or hit me up and I'll send it to you directly. So on behalf of SODFS, he is Jake. I am Dan. Much love to everybody out there. Kill it.